Hello and welcome to the first lesson in our module on how to use email effectively when networking. Now this may seem like a very basic topic initially, but there are a couple of reasons why it's really important to get this right. Even though we have mentioned emails and email templates and provided examples elsewhere in the course, this is such an important topic that we actually wanted to treat it separately, which is why this separate module just on email exists. So in the first lesson or two here, we're going to go through a few of the key points and principles. After that, then we're going to jump into actual examples of template emails, both high-level templates where the names and other information are for you to fill in, and then look at some actual examples of completed email templates so you can get an idea of how to use them in real life. So why does email actually matter so much? Well, the first reason is that it's always going to be around. Now, maybe in 1,000 years from now or 10,000 years from now, that will not be true, but at least for the next few decades, it is going to be around. Look at something like postal mail. Even though people thought it would die when email came into existence, it didn't. It still exists. People still get mail physically through the post office, and email will probably be around even longer than that. Yes, there are social media sites, there are chatting applications and mobile messaging applications, but when all is said and done, you are not going to send a professional job search or recruiting email to someone through a chat application on your phone. It's just not how it works, and so you really need to know how to use email effectively. The second reason that we're covering it here is that most people are very bad at it. This is especially true of undergraduates and sometimes recent graduates. People who have worked for at least a few years usually tend to be better at it because they have to use email so much on the job. But from what I've seen, students, in particular younger students, are quite bad at it, which really hurts your chances when you're applying to internships and full-time jobs. But the good news is that emails are also very easy to fix. You can spend under an hour and instantly write and use emails that get much better response rates and are more effective overall. And by doing that, you gain a big advantage. So if you look at everything here, you can see why we're covering it, because it's always going to be important. Most people are not good at it, but the reason most people are not good at it is because they don't take even 1 hour to improve what they're doing and then gain a big advantage over everyone else. So leverage-wise, email is one of the most effective things you can improve to get better at networking in a very short amount of time. So what are the key components of effective emails? The top three, if we had to make a list, would be number one, you have to send your emails to the right person. Now this includes doing background research and knowing enough about the person to say something intelligent. The second point is using the right level of detail. If you're initially contacting someone, you need to give more detail about who you are. But if you're just following up on something or sending an email after the fact, you usually don't need as much detail. And then finally, you have to use the right words and the right tone. You have to be what is known as politely persistent without being obnoxious. And you have to avoid giving orders or using a tone that sounds imperative. You want to use suggestive language and make suggestions rather than giving commands to people. This is another point that a lot of people get wrong. I've seen it come up with a lot of students. Also, a lot of international students sometimes don't do this correctly because business cultures and customs are different elsewhere in the world. But if you are applying to offices in the US or UK or even Hong Kong, for example, you really need to take all this into account. So the plan for this module will be, first off, in this lesson and the next one, we're going to go through some of the key points on how to set up your email and the key principles and etiquette. Then we'll take a look at email templates for different situations, including how to actually use these templates and how to actually fill in real information. In this lesson, we're mostly going to focus on how to set up your email account and use the right words and the right language in your requests. We're not going to cover background information here or background research because it was covered in the module on informational interviews, and really using Google and LinkedIn to type in words should not really require a tutorial video. So in this lesson, the 5 main points we're going to cover are as follows. First off, number 1, We'll go through how to set up your email accounts effectively, what to do and what not to do. Then point number 2, we're going to go over grammar and spelling and how grammatical and spelling mistakes can sometimes really sink your chances or at least reduce your chances greatly. These are mostly very simple to fix. Sometimes you'll have to go out and get help from other people, but this is another quick fix for a quick win. Then point number 3, we're going to go through some key considerations with the subject lines of your emails, what I call the 3 C's. And you'll see what those 3 C's are when we get to this point in this lesson. Then point number 4, we're going to look at the tone and the word choice and how you can often run into trouble with email when you are too direct. And sometimes you can run into trouble when you are too indirect. So you have to strike a careful balance between giving people commands and telling them what to do versus sending out an email and not giving any clear direction about what you want. And that's what we'll cover there. And then point number 5 concerns what to include in the body of your email. We have a specific 5-point structure that we recommend using. You don't need to hit on all 5 points, but you should at least consider them and try to use as many as you can when you write emails or modify our templates. Let's go to point number 1, email setup first, and then once we're done with this, we'll keep going through that list progressively and go down all the way from point number 1 through point number 5. With email setup, we strongly recommend setting up a separate Gmail account for networking purposes. Now, a lot of students want to use their .edu address because they think it looks more official. The problem with that is that it's going to expire over time. And when you network with people, you want a permanent email address that is going to last forever, or at least for as long as Google exists, which will probably be a long time. So the best email addresses usually involve yourname@gmail.com. Now, you can forward from a .edu address to that Gmail address, but you don't want to make the edu address your primary one just because you don't know how long it's going to last, and you want to preserve those contacts even after you've graduated. Now, a bad example of a Gmail address would be something like pinkunicorndeaths124@gmail.com. This doesn't look professional. It has an animal name in it. It has the color pink in it, and it even has the word deaths spelled incorrectly, along with a number that makes no sense. So do not include animal names, do not include color names, do not include anything else that is not your name or maybe your birth year or some other number that makes some sort of sense. A better example of an email address would be something like john.e.smith89@gmail.com. Obviously, John Smith is an extremely common name, so this person has added his birth year or maybe some other number at the end. This is much more professional and looks much more acceptable to use when networking and even to list on your resume. Now, you also have to think about your signature with email, and we do recommend using a signature even if you're a university student and you haven't done this before, simply because the people you contact are going to be busy, and it really helps to provide them your contact information in as many different ways and formats as possible. You don't want to give a 20-line signature, but you also want to give more than just your name or just your name and school, for example. So we recommend something like this. John Smith, then you can list your university and graduation year, then your email address, and then your phone number at the bottom. A lot of older people in particular really do like to use the phone. You may be allergic to it. You probably like text messages and chat applications and social networks more than the phone, but the business world still runs on phone and email, so you really need to list both these in your signature. If you're already working, obviously you wouldn't list your university or your graduation year unless you're a recent graduate, but you could list your company name or your current position at the company or something else like that in your signature. So that's really all there is to say on point number 1. It's not too complicated, but it is important to get this correct so that you have the right setup before you do this. Now, point number 2, grammar and spelling. This is one of my favorite topics because I actually really enjoy correcting people's grammar. You can ask anyone who's ever written for me or written for the site before. I come back and make a lot of edits to documents. So with this one, I have to start by saying this point that there are a lot of international students applying to jobs in places like New York and London and Hong Kong and even the Middle East. If you are not a native English speaker, you have to be very, very careful. And even if you are a native English speaker, you also have to be careful just for different reasons. The problem is that with the English language, it is extremely easy to make small mistakes. The problem with these types of small mistakes, misusing the or an, for example, is that it will hurt your chances, and a lot of recruiters will actually ignore your emails if they contain these types of errors. So it's another area where, unless you're very, very careful, it's easy to hurt your chances with something that would take 20 seconds to fix. The last thing I'll point out here is that even if you are a native speaker, presumably you know how to use indefinite and definite articles, for example, but you could still easily make mistakes. I write sometimes 12 to 14 hours a day, and I still make mistakes. And I'm a native English speaker and an experienced writer, and I still make mistakes quite often. So if you don't have much experience writing emails or writing in general, we strongly recommend getting someone else to look over your initial emails, maybe trade services with them, help them with a subject in school or help them with something, get them to look at your email. We strongly recommend doing that before you embark on a huge networking effort. Here's a quick test to see how good you are at picking up on these types of mistakes. I'm going to show you right now an actual email paragraph that came to us through a client who signed up for coaching services and signed up for some of our courses and a few other things on the site. So here's the email. You can read it on screen for yourself. I'm not going to read it because it'll be easier to tell what the mistakes are if I go through it. But take a look at this. Pause this video if you want. I'll tell you right now that there are 4 mistakes with this email message, and it's your job to figure out what they are. So if you need to, pause the video. If you've already read through it and you know what they are, great, you can advance. But take some time and look at it and see if you can find what those 4 mistakes are. Okay, so here are the mistakes. First off, the first sentence, this is David, a junior from Georgetown. Originally, the A was missing there. There was a missing article, which makes it sound a little bit weird to native English speakers. And then the second part here, I applied for the summer analyst position at Morgan Stanley's New York office. The before summer analyst was missing originally. Again, someone would understand the meaning, but it makes it sound somewhat unprofessional to leave out something like that. Then this bit about haven't got any notice from you. You don't want to write something like that. You generally don't want to use the word get or got, for example, in business professional emails, so leave that out. And then the last sentence sounds sort of weird in a business email. Let's go back and take a look at it. So it would be sad if I didn't have a chance to introduce myself to the bankers at Morgan Stanley. Using a word like sad in a business professional email comes across as a little strange, so there are better ways to fix this and to write a more effective email here. Let's go through it and actually look at a fixed version. So here it is. I am David Fox, a junior at Georgetown, and I recently applied for the summer analyst position at Morgan Stanley's New York office. I wanted to follow up with you because I have not yet heard back regarding my application status. Morgan Stanley is my first choice, so I would greatly appreciate the opportunity to interview with your team. This is much better, and the meaning is really the same. It's just we've changed how we've said it. We've fixed some of those grammatical mistakes, and we've also fixed some mistakes with the tone and what to say and what not to say in these types of emails. So the bottom line on this is that if you are not able to detect all those mistakes, you should definitely get some help when you first start sending emails. Have someone else look at them, send them to us if you want, and we can tell you what's wrong and what's right. Or if you're sending a lot of emails, I would strongly recommend getting a friend and just trading services and helping them with something, and then have the other person review your emails. I also strongly recommend getting this book called The Only Grammar Book You'll Ever Need, a really good and down-to-earth reference on grammar in the English language, helpful for writing assignments and emails and anything else you can really think of. That's about all I have to say on grammar and spelling. Let's move on to the point number 3 now, subject lines, and go through some key concepts here. With subject lines, you want to think about the 3 C's and aim for at least 2 out of 3 of these in the email subjects and the emails that you send. First off, you want credibility. So you normally establish credibility by saying the university that you're at or the company that you're working at. Number two, you want to be concise. So you don't want to send an email with some kind of ambiguous subject or something where the person reading it cannot really tell what you want. You want to mention internships or career paths or advice or something else like that in your subject so the other person knows what you are saying and why you're contacting them. And then the third one here is connection. If you have some kind of connection, whether it's from a referral, a mutual connection, a former coworker, someone who referred you to this person, or a common background from university or a similar career or something like that, you want to mention it in the email subject. Now, obviously, if you do all three of these, your subject could be too long. We don't really recommend going beyond a few words for the most part. So aim for 2 out of 3 of these and see what you can come up with. And we'll go through some examples of good and bad subject lines. The other thing here is that notice how I say the 3 C's, not the 4 C's or the 5 C's, because clever and cute are not part of this. So don't try to use clever or cute subject lines. Maybe if you know the person extremely well, you can pull it off. But for the most part, it's not a good idea to go with clever or cute. Let's look at a few good subjects that use 2 out of 3 of those 3 C's. UCLA student hedge fund internships. So you're establishing credibility with the UCLA part because it's a good, well-known school. And then you're telling the other person what you want to know about. They can put 2 and 2 together. They know if you're a student asking about internships, you probably want an internship at a hedge fund. This next one, we mentioned the mutual connection first. So we get the connection part. And then we get the second C, concise, because we're saying real estate private equity. Presumably, this person wants to know about this field or moving into this field. Then this third one, LSE student, the London School of Economics. So we're establishing credibility. And then we have exactly what he or she is looking for, seeking career advice on investment banking. And then a fourth example would be this one. We're mentioning the firm name and then internships at some type of buy-side firm here, Pine Tree Capital, for NYU student. So we have credibility and we have the person being concise again because he or she is indicating exactly what he or she wants to talk about. So those are some good examples of subject lines. We'll see more examples as we go through the actual email templates. Let's move to point number 4, tone and word choice. With this one, you have to think about softening your requests. When you email people, you never want to give them commands or orders or directives. You want to make suggestions, and you want to leave open the possibility that perhaps they cannot help you. So you want to admit that up front if you can and say, you know what? It would be great if you had time to do this, or it would be great if you could spare a few minutes to do this, but I know you're busy, so if you can't, that's fine. And ironically, using that will often result in better response rates and the person actually doing what you just said, hey, maybe you don't have time for. Here are some things to avoid. First off, exclamations, smiley faces, or emoticons. You should never use any of these in professional business emails written in English. In other languages and cultures and places, maybe. I don't really know. I'm not an expert on everything else out there. But again, if you are applying to internships and jobs in global financial centers and using English emails, no, you should never use any of these. You also want to avoid imperative statements. So if you write an email to someone and you say something like, please review my resume, or can you please set up a call with me on this date at this time? Yes, you are using the word please, so it's not quite as bad, but it's a little bit too direct sometimes. And unless you know the person well, it's usually better to give a suggestion and to say, if you have any time this week, it would be great if we could connect for a few minutes and talk about X, Y, and Z. So you're not saying, let's set up a time, or can you set up a time with me at this time and place and date? You're saying, if you have the time and if you can do it, I think it would be really good if this were actually possible. So you are making it very suggestive and less direct. And then finally, this point is very similar to the last one, but you don't want to use direct language as much. Even though the English language does not have formal politeness levels as, say, Japanese or Korean do, there is still a difference between professional English used in a business setting and then more casual language used in emails to your friends, for example. So with this, you want to make suggestions, and we'll look at some good and bad examples of how to implement this. So here's a bad, or at least a not good example of a line to write in an email. I've attached my resume. Could you please review it and give me your opinion? This is not terrible. I've seen a lot worse than this, but I would also be careful about using something like this in an email, especially if it's written to a more senior person, a VP or a managing director or director, for example. Because unless you've already spoken to the person and he or she has said, yes, I want to review your resume, please send it to me, you usually don't want to be quite this forward. A better example, or a better version of this, would be, I have attached my resume. I would greatly appreciate any advice you have on further refining it for investment banking opportunities. So you're not telling them, hey, look at my resume. You're saying, if you have time, and if you can take some time out of your schedule to take a quick look at this, I would really appreciate it. So even though you're basically saying the same thing, how you're saying it is very, very different, and that makes all the difference here. Let's look at another example. Could we please set up a call so you can share your career insights? Again, this one's a little bit too forward, and you generally don't want to say something like this, especially if you haven't met the person or you're just meeting them over LinkedIn or email or something like that. A better example would be, I know you're extremely busy, but I was hoping you might be willing to speak with me for a few minutes to discuss how you changed careers successfully. No worries if you are too busy to do this, but I would greatly appreciate any insights you could share. You're basically saying the same thing, but you're much more polite about it. You're saying, hey, I know you're busy, but in case you have a few minutes in between other tasks or assignments and you wouldn't mind speaking with me, I would really appreciate it. And I understand if you can't do it, but if you could, I would really, really appreciate it and get value out of it. So again, the message is similar, but the method, the way you're expressing it, is very, very different. And then here's another example. Are any other teams at your bank hiring? So in this example, you've been trading emails back and forth. You asked directly about internships or full-time jobs. And the person you've been speaking with said, our team or our group is done hiring now. We don't have anything left. So you think, okay, I'm not going to stop there. I'm going to go and speak with another team or find someone else who is hiring. It's a little bit too direct if you say it like this. A better approach would be to say, I was wondering if you might know whether any other teams at your firm are experiencing high deal flow and are in need of interns. If any teams have the capacity, I could be of immediate assistance given my private equity background and financial skill set. So this is probably from a university student who did a private equity internship, for example. But notice how not only is the tone here very different, because he's not directly asking who else is hiring. He's saying, I know you may not know this, but just in case you do happen to know something, I was wondering, that's what the first part here is really saying, if anyone else has high deal flow and therefore might be in need of interns, potentially I would be a person to fill this role. And then he's also establishing more value about his background in the second part, because private equity background and financial skill set immediately says, I can hit the ground running and be very useful to your team right away. So those are a few examples I wanted to go through for tone and word choice. Let's go to point number 5 now, your email body, and look at how to think about it, and then a good example of how to execute this. You usually want to start by saying who you are. You're a university student, you're an MBA student at such and such university, or you're working full-time at such and such company. Then you say how you found them. I found your name via a referral from this person. I found your name on LinkedIn. I found your name in the alumni database. I found your name at a list of conference speakers. However you found them, you want to give some brief mention of it here. Then you can give some credibility to yourself and say, I have previous internships in this industry, or I have previous full-time jobs in this industry, and now I'm looking to do something different. You want to give this because you don't want to seem like you're someone who is just coming into this and knows nothing about the finance industry. You want to give an indication that you had some previous experience. Now, if you haven't had previous internships, you could say that you're involved at the student-run fund at your university, or you could give any relevant work experience you've had or leadership experience in clubs. And if you really have nothing at all, you could even list classes here, and you could say I've taken classes on finance, accounting, whatever topic you can think of that is close and sounds relevant to whatever this firm does. Then you can include your request. Usually this takes the form of a call or asking for their advice, or sometimes you're asking directly for an internship there. All of these are different, and we'll look at different email templates for them, but you do want to include some type of request in your email. And then this is a bit optional, but I like to always include what I call the comfortable decline option. If you go back to some of those other examples that we looked at, that's the part where, for example, we say, no worries if you're too busy to do this. We're giving the person the option to say no without even replying to us. It makes them feel more comfortable, and it shows that we have put ourselves in their shoes. We know they're much busier than we are, and so it's fine if they can't do this, but if they have a few minutes to help a student and they enjoy helping students and people younger than them, it would be great if they could do that. Now, you don't always need to have a comfortable decline like this. I like including it, but sometimes it can make emails a little bit too long. So we'll look at some examples that have it and some examples that don't have it. Here's a good example of this, using one of the email templates we'll get to later on. So we see at the top, this person is giving her name, saying she's a student at NYU majoring in finance, previous internships in corporate banking, and at the student-run investment fund, and she found this person's information on LinkedIn. So that right there already addresses about 3 points: where he or she is a student at, what he or she is studying, where he or she has worked, and how he or she found this person in the first place. And then right here, we have the request. She's saying that she's very interested in private equity, and especially middle market funds focused on operational improvements and turnarounds. And she's basically requesting a quick call with this other person to learn more about it. Now, of course, the other person is not stupid. She knows that the student is requesting this because she probably wants an internship or is looking for jobs or something like that. But that's fine. Everyone knows how the game works, and you have to play by the rules of that game. Then at the end, we have a bit of a follow-up on this request. And she says here that she wants to learn more about this person's experiences at the same school that she's going to and her current role at this private equity firm, and proposes a few specific times for speaking with the person, gives a 3-hour window on a few different days. We don't have a comfortable decline here, but we have included 4 out of 5 of those points. So overall, we would say this is a good email, and it follows some of the templates that we're going to look at fairly closely. So that's about all I wanted to say in this introductory lesson to emails. Let's do a recap and summary now and go over the key points that we mentioned. Email is going to be around forever, or at least for decades and decades to come. And it's the type of thing that doesn't require 500 hours of work or study to get good results with. It takes less than 1 hour, and you can immediately get better results. To write effective emails, you have to write to the right person and do research the right way on that person. You have to use the right level of detail, and you have to use the right words and the right tone to include supporting language in your email that merits a response from the other person. To write effective emails, the 5 most important points are: number 1, get your email account set up correctly. Gmail, use a professional looking address, use a good signature that includes your email address, phone number, and something about your university, MBA program, or current company. Point number 2 is you have to be really careful about grammar and spelling, especially if you're not a native speaker, or you are a native speaker, but you don't have that much experience with writing or with using email in a professional context. Point number 3, with the subject lines, you have to consider the 3 C's. Your subject line has to be credible, it has to be concise, and it has to show a connection to the other person. Point number 4, with the tone and the word choice, avoid anything like emoticons or smiley faces or exclamations. Also avoid language that is too direct or giving commands to other people in any way. You want to be suggestive and you want to be relatively indirect while still making it clear exactly what you're asking for. And then point number 5 for the email body, we recommend using the 5-point structure that we just went over. Giving an introduction, saying where you've worked at or where you have previous experience, how you found the person, what you want, and then giving a comfortable decline. You don't have to include all 5 points, but try to get as many of them as you can. And you'll see some examples of that coming up in these email templates. That's pretty much it for this lesson. Coming up next, we'll have one more tutorial on more about email etiquette, and then we'll actually jump into our email templates here, and you'll learn more about how to set them up, the logic behind these different templates, and then see examples of how you can actually put them into practice in real life.